All right, let's jump in. All right, today we're going to be talking about how small game developers can work with really big intellectual properties. My name is Dustin Adair. I am a game developer, and sometimes I am a time-traveling Marty McFly cosplayer. Okay, real quick backstory. Back in 2010, I founded my game company called Scary Robot. And we're currently developing our 8th game. 3 of them include famous intellectual properties, which I'll talk about here in a little while. So let's review what this talk will be covering. First, we'll talk about why you'd even want to work with an intellectual property. Then we'll discuss the advantages and also the challenges when working with intellectual property. Then we'll cover how to prepare for a potential IP partnership. And then finally, we'll talk about how a small game company like mine, Scary Robot, managed to land 3 games with existing IP. So what exactly is intellectual property? There's the technical definition. That's a lot of words. In a nutshell, it means that someone created something that others might consider valuable. That's the general kind of idea there. All right, what are the advantages to working with intellectual property? Well, number one, you get a built-in fan base. I mean, now this, of course, depends on the size of the fan base and how many of those fans might actually be gamers, of course. It's a lot easier to get attention from press and PR. For example, if you tell a journalist that you're making a zombie game, the journalist is going to look at you and go, ugh, right? But if you look at the same journalist and go, hey, I'm making a Walking Dead video game, that journalist is going to go, oh, really? Tell me more, So having intellectual property just automatically will get you more attention. It also gives your game a sense of legitimacy. I mean, admit it. People are more likely to check out your game if they see a recognizable intellectual property attached to it. I mean, for example, think about when you're looking at a movie, right? What's the first question you have when you're looking at a movie? First thing you ask is, who's in it, right? It's all about legitimacy. Let's talk about what are the disadvantages to working with intellectual property. Well, for one, licensing costs. Now, they can be huge. I'll give you one example. Now, this is kind of extreme, but I still think it's relevant. A few years ago, a friend of mine was in talks with a studio to try and get a mobile license for a TV show that was currently on the air. He told me that the studio wanted $700,000 in addition to royalties for a mobile game. And remember, that was just the IP. I mean, there's going to be additional costs beyond that. Now, I mean, this is kind of an extreme case, but this is what you can sometimes face, right? But we'll talk about, there's a range, I promise. Additional costs. So getting the IP just means that you have the IP. Beyond that, the IP license will probably not include things like the actor's likeness, the music from whatever the IP is, and other things like that. So you'll have to get approval from each of these individuals, which may include additional cost as well as even maybe royalties. So you might have to split up your pie even more just to get them to approve it. Because if you do not get them to approve it, then, oops, where'd I go? You'll have to exclude them from the game. You will not be able to use them. Sometimes you'll see that in a game where it's like you see a couple of characters, but one of the characters is like a different look. That's because they could not pay them enough money, or they just weren't interested, and they had to just do a totally different character. All right. Additionally, you will suffer a partial loss of control. Now, IP holders will probably request approval. No, I don't even say probably. They will request approval for all aspects of the game. You will have to get their blessing the whole time. And you need to be clear in the contracts from the beginning how much say-so they have over the project. Otherwise, you may have this endless loop. If you do not have something that says that you guys can revision this many times, they may keep going, no, 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 and you just can never get their approval. That's the ultimate nightmare. Also, don't count on crowdsourcing. I know some of you think that, well, if I land a really famous intellectual property, then fantastic. I can always go to Kickstarter or any kind of social crowdsourcing and get my budget. The reality is that's not going to happen. Most IP holders fear a failed crowdsourcing could tarnish their IP. Now, what I'm saying here is, more times than not, you're not going to probably deal with the actual holders. A lot of times, you're going to deal with a management company that has licensed from them, and they turn around and sell the license to others. So if you do like, for example, hypothetical, like a Kickstarter, and you do what a lot of game developers have done, which is terrible, is raise all the money and just kind of go, yeah, I quit, and just pocket the cash. Now, if you do that, then that third party is the one that is going to be in trouble, and they may lose their license. So as a result, I've just, from personal experience, I've broached the subject, and they go, yeah, no. I mean, not even a discussion, it's just no. Okay, do I need a game dev track record? Short answer is absolutely, but I have an asterisk on there. You see that, right? And I'll explain that in a second. Yeah. But before we jump into that, let me get back to why. Okay, show of hands here. How many people have actually published a game on any platform? Wow, that's a good number. Congrats, man. I salute you guys. Because you guys know how much of a pain it is to release on any platform, right? I don't care what other platform you talk about. There's always headaches. Provisional files, right? Updates from the site that says, no, this doesn't, clear. It's a pain, right? But the fact that you have actually released a game is key. Because right off the bat, you're demonstrating that you can actually get a game out the door. Mobile, PC, console, whatever. It shows that you successfully launched a game. And you're not just one of those idea guys, right? We hate those, don't we? Okay. It also demonstrates the quality level that your partners could expect. You're instantly showing them visually what kind of game they might look like, what the game might look like in your art style. So it just automatically kind of sells them on the visuals of what they could expect. And ideally, if possible, you would have a similar styled game. It's also a major, major boost if you're pitching a game that's similar in style to something you've previously released, because odds are extremely high. I'm going to say 9 out of 10 times, you are going to be working with people that know nothing about games. They have no concept of games, right? So they won't know the difference between a platform or an FPS or an RTS game. They will have no clue. So if you tell them something like, well, you pitch them on, well, it's going to be like a Metroidvania, right, with some roguelike elements, I can almost guarantee you that they're going to look at you like a dog staring at a ceiling fan, like this. They have no clue. So having something that you can say, look, imagine your character in that environment. And they'll go, okay, that I understand. Okay, no published games? Good news, that's okay. There is still hope. Just because you do not have a track record yet doesn't mean that IP is completely out of your reach. There's also some options available for you, which I'll go into shortly, I promise. All right, let's talk about an example of an IP game. And let's also discuss about how integrating IP can make a major difference. Some of you are going to click onto this really fast, I promise you. Way back in 2016, a company called Niantic released a really small game called Ingress. A couple of you guys familiar with it, right? You know where I'm going with this. Ingress, they released it on mobile, and it became a huge hit with 20 million downloads. Who here would like a game with 20 million downloads? I'd like one, absolutely. Yeah, who wouldn't, right? But they weren't done. They weren't done. They revamped the game and partnered and integrated a very famous intellectual property into it and turned it into, anyone know what it became? Pokemon Go. There you go. So they went from 20 million downloads, refurbished the game, put the little characters in there, right? And what happened? They got over an estimated billion downloads. That's just amazing. And it's basically the same game. It's not like they created a new game. It's because they tied intellectual property into it. And look what that did. Little funny thing here. See if I can do this. Right there, it's kind of hard to read, but I love the fact that it says 100 million plus downloads, right? So that means at some point, some executive was asked, "Sir, what should we top out at?" And he's like, "Well, no one's going to get more than a couple million downloads, so just leave it at 100 million, and that'll be plenty." At which point, Pokemon Go said, "Challenge accepted." So, anyways, this illustrates how much an intellectual property can boost your game's success. I mean, you can't argue that right there. Okay, not all IP is created equal. Let's just accept this as fact. Okay, for example, on one end of the scale, let's put Disney over here. Okay, since Disney owns everything, right? Disney is the world at this point. And I'm sorry to be brutally honest here, I hate to do this, but I'm willing to wager, and I live in Las Vegas, so wagering is legal for me. I'm willing to bet you that there is probably not a single person here, me included, that currently has a chance of landing a game for Disney. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but that's true of me, and that's going to be true of you. Having said that, show of hands, has anyone seen this article? This is about a year ago. Disney went out public and said that, hey, Disney wants to work with indie devs to make games from its numerous IPs. And you're going, wait a second. Yeah, I saw that, right? That's totally contrary to what you just said. I don't get this. As they say, the devil is in the details. Let's discuss what they mean by an indie dev, okay? So what exactly does it take to make a game for Disney? I'm going to give you two examples right now. These are two indie dev companies that have managed to pull this off. Okay, we're going to start off with Bithell. Now, Bithell started back in 2012. The founder, Mike Bithell, released a game called Thomas Was Alone. Now, you can see the graphics. They're really deceptively simple, but he made a game that has some really strong puzzle and gameplay mechanics. The game was a success and adored by critics. So he's off to a good start. Even though it's a simple game, he had a good fan base. 3 years after that, he created the critically adored stealth game. So now he has a stealth game under his belt called Volume. 2 years later, he created a text-based adventure game called, this drives me nuts, Subsurface Circular. He likes the weird names. What can I say? Now, like I said, this is a text-based adventure game. So now we're in a totally different genre, right? Now, the next year, he does like a pseudo-sequel, another text-based adventure game. This one is called Quarantine Circular. Now, take note of how all these games have a consistent look and style. You see that, right? There's a consistency in all of that. And all of these games helped give him an established track record, along with the fact that he now has art style and also gameplay mechanics, right? He has stealth and he has text adventure games. And that is what helped him land his first famous intellectual property. He created John Wick Hex, which is an action-oriented stealth game, which he released back in 2019. So take a look. Can you see a consistent style in the art compared to his previous games? Does that look the same? Mm-hmm. And also, stealth game, which he had done previously. Now, at this point, he's demonstrated that he can, number one, deliver an intellectual property-focused game with a consistent style so they know what they're expecting, along with gameplay that's similar to their previous game, the stealth stuff, which that undoubtedly helped him land another IP-focused game. Now, this time, he was able to take that success and land a game for Disney, and that is Tron Identity, a relatively recent release. Now, in this case, Tron Identity is a visual novel type game with gameplay that follows in the style of his previous text adventure games. So once again, he's following in some of his previous genres. And an art style that follows, well, pretty much everything he's done. I mean, he has a very consistent art style. Very, very consistent. All right. Now for our second success story, that would be Delilah Studios, which was also formed back in 2012. Now the first game is called Janksy. Now it's a cutesy physics kind of puzzle type game, sort of like an Angry Birds type game. You can see the kind of the cutesy graphics. They're small, but you get a sense of it. But 3 years later, his company completely changes gears, and they release a game called Overruled, which is a multiplayer brawler game. Totally different gameplay, totally different art styling, right? But this gameplay mechanic must have gotten someone's attention because their next game is another multiplayer brawling game that ties into a very famous intellectual property. In this case, they landed Battletoads. So they create a Battletoads video game, but the key thing to note here is how they really stepped up their art level. Now, it's another fighting game, so they've already kind of demonstrated that they can make a good fighting game, but they've really changed their level of quality in their art. But anyone see any kind of influence from Cuphead here? I mean, there's some obvious kind of connections with that, But I don't knock them for mimicking Cuphead because it paid off for them, and that is because their next game is a cartoony platform game for Disney. In this case, it's called Illusion Island. So now they're making a Disney game. This game combines the exaggerated art style that we saw in the Battletoads game with the platforming component of their Overruled game. And it incorporates the classic characters from Disney, like Goofy, Donald Duck, Mickey, and Disney's key treasure, Mickey Mouse. They're making a Mickey Mouse Disney game. And they were an indie studio. So hopefully this illustrates that, yes, technically indie developers can make Disney games, but there's a lot more to it than just being an indie dev. Interesting note here, though. I found this fascinating. So something that you'd probably assume is the fact that, okay, they had those previous IP games, John Wick and Battletoads, right? And the reason that Disney knocked on the door is because we like the art style, we like the gameplay, and you guys have made successful games with IP, right? Get this. They weren't really successful. John Wick Hex, you see that, according to Steam Spy, which is off the screen at the bottom there, but trust me, I have a reference there. Steam Spy said that they have an estimated 50 to 100,000 Steam PC sales, and Battletoads has only 20 to 50,000. I mean, that's not Fortnite numbers. Come on. I mean, realistic. That's okay, but that's not fantastic. But to me, what that says is the fact that companies like Disney and other big IP holders are willing to overlook some aspects. In this case, sales, right? If the visual look and gameplay that you are creating aligns with what they have in their own head, because now they're basically saying that, yes, these games didn't do well, but we trust that the game that you make for us will succeed, and they would be willing to play and give you an opportunity. So it's just something to keep in mind that there is leadway. Okay, coming back to this scale, we got Disney on one side. And on the other end of the scale, let's just say we have that crazy uncle, right? We all got that crazy uncle that he has a couple hundred followers on TikTok because he's willing to eat anything on camera. I mean, eat anything, right? So he has like a cult following, right? So and technically that would be considered intellectual property as well, okay? But if you asked him, I bet you the crazy uncle would say, yeah, you want to make a game about me? Yeah, you can do it. But the question is, would you really want to? I mean, technically it is IP. So the point here is that there is a vast range, right? You have Disney on the one end and you have the crazy uncle on the other. So for our purposes here, I'm going to target somewhere around here, right? We're not shooting for Disney, but we're also staying way clear of the crazy uncle, okay? Choosing the right IP. This is key. How do you know it's the right one for you and your company? I'll give you some guidelines here. Number one, have a deep passion for the subject matter. This is by far the most important item. And I say this because you're going to be working with this intellectual property for months or even years, depending on the scope of the game. And if you lack that passion in the beginning, the odds are very good that it's not going to get better as you go along. And if you do not have that passion, chances are that the game will ultimately suffer as a result. If you don't care about every aspect of it, then that may play into the ultimate result of the game. Okay, so I'm going to do a test case here, right? A hypothetical IP game that I would like to make. I'm going to choose this. Don't know if anyone's heard of this show before. Anyone? Does it ring a bell for anyone? Yeah? Okay. Yeah, Guns and Gloves. Honestly, I enjoyed the crap out of this series. I got to be totally honest with you. This series was my kind of dark humor. I loved it. This was like Guy Ritchie back when he used to make good stuff, you know. So many great twists. I loved it. Okay, so this is going to be the test case. Let's just say that I'm obsessed with it, right? I really enjoyed it, so let's just push that up a level and just say I'm totally obsessed. And I have lots of passion for the show, and I'm hell-bent on making a Guns and Gulags video game. That's my passion now. To begin with, I'm going to perform copious amounts of research. Now, even if you consider yourself a super fan, let's just say I know every character, I know every actor, I know everything about this whole series front to back. Do more homework. Just keep going. Consume as much as you can about the IP. Because you want to assure the IP holders that they're putting their property in knowledgeable hands. I mean, the worst case scenario is they ask you about a character and you go, that's the girl? You know, that's embarrassing, that's bad. And then they're going to question, it's like, wait, are they just trying to get the license so they can make a game when they don't really care about the subject matter? So learn as much as you can. And that will also help in also making a better robust game because you have a better database to pull from. And also that that the game that you're going to make will feel like a natural extension of the property. And that will also reassure the intellectual property holders. No, should have put that up earlier. Sorry about that. Okay. Know what the target wants. Now, in this case, I believe that gamers are going to want to play as Tipu, Arjun, and maybe even as Amaram, because we all like to play villain characters sometimes, don't we? Right? Mr. Fourcuts? Mr. Yeah, there you go. So we will pitch the idea that you can play as all three characters. And of course, we're going to mix in a bunch of violence because that's what the series had, right? So we've got those three characters, we got lots of violence, and we're also going to add a dash of romance because the series did a fantastic job of having some romantic storylines, which that was nicely done, by the way. Like I said, I really liked this series. And having this collection, this pitch, I think we'd be giving the fans exactly what they would want. Okay, next thing. Have a clear vision of what the game will be. Following on with our test case with Guns and Gulags, my pitch would be something like this. I would pitch it as the idea of going, look, it's going to be somewhere between the edginess of Grand Theft Auto, but kind of with the over-top humor that you'd see in, like, Saints Row. Okay? But here's the thing. We are not a AAA company. None of us here, if you guys are AAA companies, you're not here in this room right now, okay? We're all small indie developers, which means that we have a budget that's equal to the coffee budget of like what, you know, Rockstar probably has, okay? That's just reality. I accept that, right? So we're going to pitch, in this hypothetical situation, we're going to pitch something with more like an isometric view, something more along the lines of like the older Grand Theft Auto 2. Now, obviously, this is an extreme example. I mean, I wouldn't pull this far back, and obviously I would have much, much prettier graphics, of course. But I would also present it as a semi-open world, right? I would say that it's free roaming, absolutely, like a free roaming world, but in a much smaller scale than you would see in a modern-day Grand Theft Auto. Because the worst thing, absolutely worst thing you can do is say that we're going to make a Grand Theft Auto game. You know, with Guns and Gulags, you have like all this territory to roam, and it's going to be like right there over the shoulder, and all these fantastic graphics. If you overpitch and underdeliver, that is not going to end well for you. So you have to be realistic in what you're pitching. I know you feel like it would increase your chances if you say that we're going to make a Grand Theft Auto quality, you know, and that would bring them on maybe, more likely. But what happens when you can't reach that level? Just something to keep in mind. And finally, you need to have a great relationship with the IP partners. This is so important for so many reasons. For one, you're going to be working with them for a very, very long time, depending on how long the production goes for, right? So you want to be on the same page from day one until the game is published. You want to make sure that you both have the same vision. You'll also need their approval on everything. Every step of the way, you have to get them to sign off on it. They have ultimate say-so. That it'll be in the contracts, I promise you, right? So you want to make sure, like I said, that everything you were in agreement on the whole way through, okay? And finally, think about this, because if you do diverge, and if you kind of go, no, the game needs to be in this direction, and the IP holder is pushing back, going, no, this is totally wrong, and it starts to go south on you, the project will ultimately suffer, but it could get so extreme that they could just finally come back and go, this isn't working, we're going to go ahead and pull the license. At which point, you've now invested all this money in a game that you're not going to be able to release. That's just something to keep in mind. So, like I said, a relationship with the IP partners is crucial, is key. So, how to prepare for actually reaching out to the IP holder. In our hypothetical case, let's just say that I've done all my homework and now I'm ready to reach out and try and make the ultimate Guns and Gulobs video game. Number one, create a vertical slice or at least a mock-up. Now, this is an extreme example. Once again, imagine if the camera were higher up, right? Because I was talking about doing something. This is, I just grabbed some footage, but, having a vertical slice of gameplay or at least a mock-up, that is key. If you have the time and the resources to make a small vertical slice to show what the gameplay would be like, you can hand it to them and just say, hey, take the controller, move around, and give them a sense of how the game would play. That is fantastic. Once again, they're not gamers. So being able to show the gameplay will take you a long way. If that's not possible, then you want to at least try and create a non-interactive video, kind of like what you see here, to demonstrate what the game will be like. Now, you don't have to build a ton of assets, right? You can use available assets just to make this mock-up, just to have something to show. I'm sorry if I'm beating a dead horse here. They're not going to be gamers. So the more kind of visual stuff, especially stuff in motion, they're going to be able to connect to it much, much better. Now, along with that, you'll also need some mock-up screenshots and concept art. Now, you should create these either way, but if a vertical slice demo or even a gameplay mock-up video aren't feasible, then screenshots and concept art are absolutely mandatory. You have to show them something. Remember, like I said, you're dealing with non-gamers. So being able to demonstrate a wide variety, not just a couple of screenshots of the same location, but a whole scope to show the different characters, the different environments, will go a long way to bring them on board, to help them understand exactly what your vision is for the game. Does that make sense? Cool. Glad you're out there. All right, next thing, create a pitch deck. This is absolutely mandatory. You have to have a pitch deck. I'm not going to go into a whole giant discussion on creating the ultimate pitch deck because, number one, there's tons of videos out there that show you how to make the perfect pitch deck, right? So you can find lots of tutorials, lots of templates that will guide you into making a fantastic pitch deck. But having said that, keep in mind one thing, those videos and those templates are going to be oriented towards publishers, game publishers. And we're not aiming for publishers, we're aiming for the IP holders. So you need to be careful with this pitch deck that you're not using a lot of game dev jargon in there. You need to keep it simple that they can understand it. Otherwise, you can lose them and confuse them. So just keep it more in line with reassuring them that they can trust you with their precious IP child. Just keep it very narrative, very simple to help try and bring them on board. Let's talk about now how to actually contact the IP holders. This is obviously key. Now, this sounds obvious, but do everything you can to find an in with the IP holder because it greatly increases your chances. Obviously, any way that you can go directly to them is going to just give you a super big boost. In a perfect world, hopefully, ideally, you know someone that can put you in direct contact with them. And this is something to consider also when you're looking and considering like multiple IPs. If you have a connection, someone that knows someone, that should jump to the top of the list. Just knowing that you are going to have hopefully a direct access to those people when you're reaching out. Now, for an example, compare it to if you have a friend that works at a company that you want to work for, if you hand them your CV and they take it to HR, you know that that person is speaking for you. right? And your CV is going to go to the top of the list as opposed to if you just blindly email it to HR. So even if it's someone that knows someone that knows someone that knows someone, even if it's like that removed, anything is better than just a blind submission. So but I mean, that may not be the case. You may not know anyone. And if that is not an option, then we move on. In that case, we need to track down who actually owns the rights. Now, for the example of our test case with Guns and Gulabs, we know it's a Netflix production. We're not going to reach out to Netflix because Netflix will not reach out to us. We are not going to be able to have a contact there. So we're not going to go ahead, we're just going to bypass Netflix altogether, which means that we need to turn to the Oracle, the all-knowing Google. So after we do a quick search for Guns and Gulabs, we find a nice little write-up on Wikipedia. Now there on Wikipedia is a nice little link to D2R Films. So now we are going in the right direction. So we do a search and we come to the D2R Films website, scroll down all the way down. That's a big website. If you scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll find that, which is this little email us link. Now, that's a start. If you click on that and you say, hey, I want to make a game, you know that it at least is, in theory, going to the right place. But it's not a great lead. And the obvious reason is because that's a catch-all. You know, anyone can submit to that, which means that they get, I'm sure, barraged with endless amounts of submissions to that link on a daily basis. So it's great, but it probably disappear in the giant collection. So it's a nice start, but I think we can find better ways to approach them. All right, next up, we're moving over to the Internet Movie Database. You all familiar with IMDb? Rings a bell? Yeah. All right, so I looked up Guns and Gulabs, scrolled down to the details section of the page, and I found this. Now, there you go. Let's see if I can hit it there. Yeah. It's buried down there in the bottom, right? So now there we're going to find a link that shows D2R Films full company info, which brings us to here, right? And then right over there it is. Yeah, okay, it's drowned out. It's crappy laser. But it's hard to read, but it says view full company info for D2R Films. Now, that's fantastic. That gets us on the right path. But, of course, the catch here is that it requires IMDb Pro, which is a paid service. On the other side, though, they do have a free trial offer. So at least once, we can take a stab at getting this information without having to make the investment. So that's still an option. But having said that, we still got other options. We're not done yet. Next, our final stop is LinkedIn. And a quick search turns up their page, which has, maybe, there it is, right there. Now we got connect and message. This is a lot better approach. And the reason I say this is still a blind submission, but it has one major advantage, and that is the fact that when you submit to them through LinkedIn, it's not just going to send your message, but it's also going to tie to your LinkedIn page. So when they get that message, they're going to get all of your info along with it. So if you have, here's all these games I've done, now they're instantly going to hit that message along with your info, which hopefully will greatly increase their interest. Because if it's just a blind submission, they go, I have no idea who they are, I'm not going to click on the link, I'm not going to do the homework. But this, because it's automatically going to be displayed, they go, oh crap, I remember that game. That's actually noteworthy. And now I've increased my chances. All right, now having said that, a big red warning light here. Now, when you go to LinkedIn, you might find contacts to executives or even C-level, CEOs, CFO, you might find those. Do not email them. I say that even though they're there and you kind of go, wow, right there, straight to the top. If you do that, just think about it. These guys are busy, okay? And if they're getting a blind email for someone they don't know, the odds are really good that they will take the time to read it and nuke you from orbit, which might completely destroy your chance of ever getting the license. So that's something that, you have to be very cautious of. If possible, try looking further down the corporate ladder. You want to try and find someone that's more like either an assistant or someone that's like in marketing or something like that. Better choice, better chances of working your way up the corporate ladder and securing the game, hopefully. All right, now let's talk a bit about license agreements. Now there's tons of variations out there, okay, but we're just going to focus on 2 versions primarily. First one is the most traditional. Now the most traditional has a couple of key features. Usually with a traditional agreement, you'd have a license payment up front, right, or maybe broken up into installments. Now, the second thing that comes with this is also royalties based on gross sales. Now, the word gross is the key term here, because what that's telling you is that means the royalties are based on the full price of the item, not after Steam takes its 30%, not after your development cost. Gross is right from the beginning, right? So you have to keep that in mind when you're discussing and coming back and forth over what those royalties might be that you'd agreed to. Just understand that that's a much, much bigger piece of the pie than if it was just net. So that's just something to factor in when you're trying to do your budget and you're calculating the costs of what Steam costs for your production as well as the development costs and all that kind of stuff. Just keep that in mind. So an alternate agreement would be this: a single upfront payment with no more royalties. Just imagine, you're just making one payment, they take it, and you're done. Which, that sounds like, yeah, sign me up. That sounds perfect. That sounds great. But before you jump on that, ask yourself a couple of questions. Why are they doing this? Do they not have faith in their own IP? Why are they willing to sacrifice royalties? To me, that implies that they're not really even sure that it would ever succeed. They'll just take the money up front, and they're done. And if they do that, will they even actually support the game? If you've paid them up front and they walk away, they may not come back to help back the support the games because they're done. Unless there's something contractually that requires them, they may just take the money and run. All right. Can anyone name a famous example where an author of an IP sold the rights for a video game for lump sum, but regretted it badly later on? Anyone know what I'm talking about? Say it. Not Spider-Man, but, yep. Okay, I nailed it. There it is, The Witcher. So, the author was approached and they said, we want to make a video game based on your books. And he's like, okay. And they go, we can do royalties or we can do a lump sum. And he's like, yeah, I'll take that money. So he took the upfront payment. And as we all know, the Witcher games became massive, successful hits. So at which point, the author comes back, knocks on the door, and kind of goes, I want more money now. I got cheated, right? And they paid him. They gave him more money. I have no idea how much they paid him, but they paid him. But here's why. It keeps everyone happy. And CD Projekt Red can continue making Witcher number 4, And at this point, because Witcher was so successful, I'm sure they looked at it and kind of went, yeah, here you go. Go away again, But it is a statement that he obviously had no vision. Because once again, the author of The Witcher, I'm going to go on a limb and guess that he's not a gamer. He did not see the potential. All right. So let's just hypothetically say that we've now had our Guns and Gulags discussion and we're now in the whole agreement phase. All right. So what do you get when you've actually secured the license? Now, at a bare minimum, you can expect to at least use the IP name and the subject matter. That's a bare minimum in the agreement. Absolutely, bare minimum. Hopefully, you also get permission to use things like the characters, the stories, and other lore that go along with the IP. And any additional items that are included in the agreement. Now, you have to be careful here. Don't assume that you have access to everything, all right? Make sure that everything you want from this IP is included and spelled out in the contracts. Because if you don't, and you kind of go, oh, they come back and go, no, you're not allowed to use that. You're done. You have to pull that item out because you did not get that agreed to from the beginning. So just be very cautious that you want to make sure that you have license for everything you need to make that game. All right, so what other things are the IP owners actually offering? Now, these things I'm going to talk about aren't mandatory, but they can help with getting the word out and rallying the fan base for the IP. For example, what are their social media like? Do they have a big following? And if they do, are they willing to post on your behalf to get the game attention? If they have a couple million followers and they're posting going, hey, they're making a game, you now have a potential couple million sales right there just from the fans. Any chance of getting endorsements from members of the IP subject? For example, having a cast member posting to their online network and just posting to their fans. That also equally is going to be a massive, massive boost. The fans are going to jump all over it. Finally, do they have a mailing list? Now, they're probably not, if they do, they're not going to hand it over to you. They're not going to give you, here's the list of all the email names. But hopefully, they're at least willing to send a newsletter out for you on your behalf to promote the game. And that would be an equally big boost. Okay, so let's talk about our first IP example with my company, called Tribble Troubles. Show of hands, anyone here know what a tribble actually is? Anyone heard of a tribble? Okay, that's fine. I wouldn't expect you to. Tribbles first appeared in the classic 60s Star Trek series in an episode called The Trouble with Tribbles. Sorry, I'm making myself cough now. Now, they're cute, purring little furballs that have a really bad habit of eating all the food they find. Now, in the case of the show, they were eating something called quadritriticale. That was the thing they were always eating. All right, a little bit of diversion here, but I'm fortunate enough to have a table, a booth, at the San Diego Comic-Con. That's like the biggest comic convention in the U.S., and I've been doing a table there for over a decade. And I use it to test out my new games. It's a fantastic way. They have 140,000 attendees, and I use it just to put them in front and find out if the game is working as I'm developing it. It's fantastic. It's inexpensive quality testing. But several years ago, David Gerald, who is the guy that wrote the original The Trouble with Tribbles screenplay, stopped by. He saw the games, looked at them, and asked if I was interested in making a Tribble game for him. I was like, yes. Sure, I'd love to. Now, I know this is kind of totally different than all the steps we were talking about a moment ago. I mean, this has nothing to do with that checklist, of reaching out to the IP holder. In this case, they came to me. But I still think there's a really super big valuable lesson here, and that is being at the right place can create opportunities for you. What I'm talking about is if you go to like PAX, Gamescom, or any of those gaming conventions, then you're going to be a really, really small fish in a really giant pond, okay? But if you attend like comic conventions or anime conventions or things like that, you immediately become a much bigger fish. Okay, for example, Hyderabad, they have the Comic-Con. That comes up here in January. Has anyone gone to either this one or the other comic conventions area? Okay. If you do, I think what you're going to find is a lot of comics, a lot of artists, but you're not going to find a lot of indie games there. And I think, personally, I believe this is a big untapped potential. I mean, don't think in terms of sales. I've never made money trying to promote my games at Comic-Con. That's a waste of time. If you make some money, great, that's a bonus, right? But think primarily in terms of networking, because you're surrounded by journalists, you're surrounded by influencers, and you're also surrounded, most importantly, by artists that have probably created their own intellectual property. You now have a better chance of making contact with them, especially, if you can speak to them, or if they're on break and they're walking by your booth and they see the game and they're going, whoa, my IP would work well in this kind of game. You now have just leapfrogged right to the front, and you have the potential. And that's exactly what happened for me. He just came up and just said, hey, are you interested? And obviously cost is a factor. I understand that. I'm in the same boat. But in my case, and what I would suggest is you can always split the table. Share it with other developers. Now, that immediately cuts your costs, but also I believe that it will increase your foot traffic because you now have multiple games to look at and you have all these people. I mean, it's the nature of it. I mean, look at the floor down there, right? You see all these games on the walls and you see a constant group of people gathering around. So, I mean, unless you guys are making identical games that may step on each other's toes, but aside from that, you're going to have lots of people that walk up, they go, whoa, what is this? This is a comic convention, but I see video games. And then you got these people that are interested. Okay, sorry for the little diatribe there, but let's go back to the triples now. Just want to get the context of how this came about in the first place. Okay, so we struck a deal. And let's talk about some of the limitations I was facing while making this game. Now, there it is. I only had the rights to use the Tribble, Quadritriticale, and these little orange guys called Glommers, which came out of an animated Star Trek series that also was in the 60s. All of this was created by David Gerrold. So the great thing is that I was able to do this because David Gerrold had the relationship with CBS. CBS is the company that made Star Trek and Paramount. So he has that relationship, which means that I don't have to go to CBS and Paramount and deal with him. I'm just dealing with him, which is fantastic. But, as I said, I only have the rights to this. Nothing else. I'm not allowed to use Kirk, Spock, any of the characters from the show, the Enterprise, anything else. Now, the license was so limited that the Tribble has 2 sound effects. It purrs when it's happy, and it screeches when it's scared, okay? I was not even allowed to use the sound effects from the show. I couldn't just grab the sound and use it. That was a violation. No, CBS owns that. So, thank God for YouTube. I went to YouTube, did a little research, and found out how easy it was. Somebody had broken down the sound effects. And I was able to reverse engineer and create the sounds with the animals they used and create my own versions that were so close that even the biggest fan never realized that I wasn't using the sound effect from the show. But my point being is the fact that you could have a license that is really, really very specific. So I began working not with David Gerrold himself, but with his business partners, and I started developing a prototype. Now, my initial guidelines were to create a game that could be played in very short bursts. And this is the scary thing, he also wanted it to be a premium mobile app. Not free to play, he wanted it to be premium in this day and age, which is scary. So I went ahead and started. I developed a casual puzzle game prototype that was in the style of the games that are kind of like Hitman Go and Lara Croft Go. They're puzzle games. It's not like a real time. It's more of like working step by step. Because I believe the fans of the original show are of a certain age, which is a polite way of saying that they're all old. And they're not going to be gamers. So I need to make something that was, casual, simple to play, but mentally challenging. And I was really proud of it. It was a nice little puzzle game. Unfortunately, the partners didn't like it. And we hadn't really discussed this before, and now we have this moment. So this is a little backwards, but they came forward and just said, no, we just want Pac-Man. Make us Pac-Man. Tribble looks like Pac-Man. Make that. And it's like, okay. Then I had a decision to make. I had 2 choices. I could push back and kind of go, no. Pac-Man is an arcade game. I think, in my heart of hearts, I think that's a wrong choice. And push back, but risk losing the license, at which point they may go, okay, this isn't going to work. Let's stop this right now. And then I've lost the license. Or I could just, bite my tongue, say, okay, fine. I trust you. Let's do this. Let's make this game. And ultimately, that's what I chose because I was really anxious to make a game based on this licensed IP. So, having the Pac-Man guideline, I proposed a vertical climbing game, similar to like games like Spelunky, Downwell, and Super Meat Boy. I basically explained it to him. I said, look, it's Pac-Man climbing upward. And he goes, okay, I get that. And he agreed, and I developed the game. But this absolutely illustrates the challenges you can face when you're working with an IP partner, especially when they are not gamers. No matter how many times I tried to explain stuff, it fell on deaf ears because they have no concept of what these games are like. And that's a big challenge. So, there you go. This is the game we created. There's 16 levels spread across 4 different unique environments. And honestly, I'm really proud of the game we produced. It plays really well, but ultimately, as I was talking, I believe that we missed out on an opportunity here by making this type of game. So let's talk about the positives that came from working with the Tribble property. We got press. We absolutely got press. We had an article, just for example, here's a couple of them. We got written up in Sci-Fi Magazine, which is a big, noteworthy magazine. And we also got a nationally syndicated news service. This article, the one on the right, went out across the U.S. to all these different locations. And I say probably wouldn't. I say probably wouldn't. There's no way I would have gotten these guys to write up a game if I just had a fur ball that was jumping around on the screen. They wouldn't have cared. But because I said it's Tribbles, they were like, yeah, we'll write about that. So having this property got me press. Also, another positive, the game was embraced by the Star Trek gaming fans. Absolutely. You can see the pictures here. This is at a Star Trek convention, and you can see that they're really having a good time playing it. The gaming fans were all over it, and they really enjoyed it. But the caveat here is that you notice something. They're young. They're all young. Star Trek is a show from the 60s, right? So this young audience, while they're enthusiastic, are really small. They're not a large percentage of the fans. So let's talk about some of the negatives, the challenges that came out of this project. By making an arcade game, instead of the casual game that I was proposing, I believe in my heart of hearts that we missed out on bringing in a large number of the core Star Trek fans, the older fans. I think actually I have a picture of the non-gaming Star Trek fans playing the game. Yep, there they are. No, I'm kidding. Joke, kidding. Just a little joke there. The other challenge, of course, as I hinted at before, is the fact that we're releasing a premium mobile game in this day and age. That takes a lot of nerve. When you're dealing with 99.99% of all the games being free to play, and you go, yeah, no, this game, you can pay for it. That is a big challenge, particularly on mobile. And as a result, getting the sales has been an absolute challenge. Now, in this case, ultimately, this is kind of a cautionary tale. We ended up parting ways. I backed out of the project, and I did not succeed financially like I would have liked. But at this point, the game itself, if you're interested, I haven't checked. I don't know if it's available. I assume it's available. It's free now. They actually dropped it free. Oh, there it is. Now, on a brighter note, making this game helped create new opportunities for myself and for my company. Now, I live in a sleepy little town called Las Vegas. Anyone heard of Las Vegas? It's a small, yeah, okay. It has a population of like 50 people. It's not that much. But anyways, having said that, it's a great town, by the way. I love it. Every year, there is a licensing convention in my own backyard. I love this. Every year. Now, I went there a while back and managed to land a whole new intellectual property. Now, there was a gentleman named Irwin Allen. None of you guys know this, unless you're a film geek extreme. He was famous for creating disaster films back in the 70s. He made these films like The Towering Inferno, The Poseidon Adventure, which got remade years later as Poseidon, Earthquake. So he made all these disaster films, but he also made some TV shows. And one of those TV shows was a major childhood favorite of mine. I loved the show, and it was called Lost in Space. Now, this show ran for 3 seasons back in the 60s. Netflix did a reboot a couple of years ago. Really nice update, by the way. They did a nice job. But, of course, I was pitching for the 60s version of the show because, honestly, I could afford this. I could afford that license. I was not going to be able to, Netflix, I could go up to that booth and they kind of go, yeah, go away. But anyways, so I went up to the booth. Sorry, cracking myself up. Now, I explained how I grew up watching this show as a kid and that I would love to make a game for it. That's a good start, Okay, I've shown my enthusiasm for the show. Okay, that's good, but it's not fantastic. But then I also point out that my company has already produced 6 games Okay, well, now I've established that I have a track record, right? And I'm currently making the world's first video game based on tribbles from Star Trek. Now I've demonstrated that I've worked with IP, at which point he responded with, yeah, let's talk. So I went from just someone that just walked up to him cold to someone that had motivation to bring him on board. And we talked, and I landed the IP. I said it before, I'll say it again. Having a track record and having intellectual property already in your history helps a lot. Once you've done it, it makes it easier to get that door open. All right, so let's talk about what things were included with the Lost in Space IP. Lucky for me, thanks to the really brutal contracts they used to have in the 60s, this is so generous. Okay, well, to begin with, of course, I get use of the name of the show and the premise. That's a given, like we talked about before. But get this. I have access to character likeness. I can take all of the people that were on the original show, put them in my game at no additional cost. You cannot do that in this day and age. Any license now, you're going to have to go to all the individual people and get them to approve, like I talked about before. But this is back in the 60s, when the contracts were terrible. Great for me, terrible for them. So I'm allowed to use all of the characters, their likeness, with no additional fees. I'm also allowed to use the original dialogue from the show. That means that the characters will not only look like they did on the show, but they will also sound like them because it'll be the original voices and even the sound effects too. So I mean, I've now reduced my all the dialogue that I have to record. I've reduced that budget, the sound effects. There's, like I said, there's over 80 episodes from the show, lots of sound effects to pull from. All of that is now taken care of. And this is the best too. And even the original music from the show, I'm allowed to use. Orchestral music recorded for the show. A lot of this music, by the way, was written by John freaking Williams. Don't know if you know who that is, but John Williams wrote a lot of this music for the TV show. A couple years later, he wrote the music for Star Wars, which means that I have an orchestral soundtrack from my video game, all these instruments, and honestly, if you listen to it, it sounds just like Star Wars music. And that was all included, no additional costs. Now, I mean, this is an anomaly. This is not the way it works nowadays, but because of the way the contracts were written back in the 60s, I was given this gift, which was absolutely fantastic. So I jumped all over that. It also gave me permission to bring back any previous characters, which is also a fantastic thing. As we talked about before, you want to detail exactly what you're allowed to include. In this case, I have over 80 episodes to pull from, and each episode had all these wacky different characters, and fans are fanatical for some of these characters, any which I can bring back and make the fans happy. All included in the license. All right, what were the challenges with working with this intellectual property? This is huge. No changes to the existing canon. Now, the show is called Lost in Space. The family is called the Robinsons. It's actually, if you ever read the story, Lewis Carroll Stevens, I think, Swiss Family Robinson. It's a family that crashes their boat on an island. This is just a sci-fi version of it. In this case, they have a spaceship, and they crash land on a planet, and it's the Robinsons trying to survive. Now, ultimately, they're hoping to get the ship repaired and fly back to Earth. Unfortunately, that's never going to happen in my game. I'm not allowed to do that, because as soon as I do that, the show's over. They're home and they're safe. So I'm not allowed to do that. I can't change canon. So that's off the table. I can't introduce any new characters. Now, normally this would be a really bad thing, but because, as I said, they're giving me the rights to all the characters. I mean, we're talking hundreds of characters to pull from. That's fine. This is not a big loss. It's there, but it's not huge. So the game itself, I decided to make it as a story-focused, point-and-click adventure game, kind of like LucasArts or Telltale games. You're familiar with those type of games. So, which means that it's going to be heavy in story with just some puzzles mixed in. And here's the trailer for it. Hopefully this doesn't blow your ears.
My family and I took to the stars to find a new home on Alpha Centauri for all the people on Earth. But what we really found was...
Danger! Danger, Will Robinson!
Please, Dr. Smith, don't start your tricks again. You always get in trouble.
Never fear, Smith is here. You're perfectly safe.
Silence, you cackling clod!
There you go. And the great news is the fact that so far my partners have loved it. Specifically, also, the young kid, Will Robinson in the show, was played by an actor named Bill Mumy, who's still around. He's in his 60s now. He's seen this, and he wants to be involved. That's fantastic. You know, what I was alluding to before, if you can have some of the people that are involved in the show and get them interested, that's huge because he has social media, he has lots of fans. All this will boost my chances of the game succeeding. Now, remember, you have to keep the fan base in mind when you're choosing the type of game you're making. And as I talked about, we're developing a point-and-click adventure game, knowing full well that point-and-click adventure games don't sell nearly as well as other type of games out there. But this kind of game, which is, like I said, lots of storytelling with occasional puzzles, is what the fan base that are mostly non-gamers would be interested in. But also to cover our bases, we're also even adding a movie mode. Well, if the player chooses that, then at that point it just pulls out all the puzzles and just plays itself. It's almost like a YouTube video kind of thing, but it allows the fans of the show to support us without having to worry about playing the game. They can get the popcorn, sit on the couch, and watch what I'm pitching to them as the 4th season of the show. You know, for all the fans that love season 3, all they wanted was a 4th season, and this gives it to them. You know, and that is the hope that so far the reaction for the fans has been fantastic. You know, just get it here already. Speaking of which, so we're going to probably split the game into multiple episodes just for budgetary reasons. The first episode we're targeting a release next year, but the demo itself will be coming out on the 9th. It's just a couple days away. And I'm excited and terrified at the same time to find out what the fans think. We'll have to see how that goes. But, and no pressure, but, you know, feel free to wishlist it. No pressure. All right. Gratuitous plug is over. All right. Now, I know the inclination is to just think about movies and television, because that's all we've been talking about are things that are movie and TV related. But remember, intellectual property covers everything. You remember I talked about the crazy uncle, you know? There are other examples, like this. Cool Spot. Now, this is a video game based on the mascot, which is just a red dot that appears on the 7-Up bottle. This was a couple decades ago. They made a video game based on the dot. And by the way, it was actually a pretty good game, you know? But, I mean, anything can be intellectual property and very successful. In this case, 50 Cent. Anyone a 50 Cent rapper fan? There we go. There's it. Look at this, right? You guys know that he made a video game? Bulletproof. He financed it himself. He did his own game. And to be brutally honest, the reviews were not good. They trashed it. But guess what? It doesn't matter. He still sold over 1 million copies. I'm telling you, fans matter. You know? Excuse me. Now, an interactive children's book is just an interactive children's book. But if you add a celebrity to it, in this case, an actress known as Shelley Duvall, like in the Shining, Popeye movies from the 80s, she was more famous back then. But now it's going to grab people's attention, right? They kind of look at that and they go, wait, is that Shelley Duvall? And now they're going to pick it up and look at it. Before, they're kind of look at it, it's like, oh, it's another children's book, interactive kind of thing. It's just having her attached to it makes a big difference. And finally, we also have, there you go, Cyanide and Happiness. Now, this is a video game based on a comic strip. And this generated between 100 and 200,000 sales. And this is a point-and-click adventure game. That's decent numbers. I hate to say that, you know, accepting the fact that that's the way point-and-click adventure games are. But still, that's some decent numbers. Now, had it not had the intellectual property tied to it, it probably would not have gotten that level of success. So the point here is that do not think of just TV shows and film. You know, maybe you have a connection to someone that has some kind of IP that you could reach out. You know, so just think in those terms. Do not think of just TV and film. Think of random stuff like this. I mean, literally, what do we have? We have a soda bottle, we have a rapper, we have an actress, and we have a comic strip. That's totally different. All right. So show of hands here, be honest. After all we just talked about just now, how many of you guys feel that intellectual property is just out of reach for you? You know, it's just, you know, don't think it's going to be possible. Okay, well, that's fine. Maybe you feel like, you know, it's too hard to land the intellectual property to begin with, right? Or maybe you feel like even if you did manage to score it, how are you going to be able to finance it, right? Well, don't give up. I've got two more options for you. This is what I alluded to before. One option is really, really risky, and one of them isn't as risky. So let's go with the risky option. Let's roll the dice. Or as I like to say, it is the forgiveness instead of permission approach. Just think in your own head right now. Think about what your ideal IP would be, the ideal game that you want to make right now, okay? One, of course, ideally that doesn't already have a game existing based on it. Now, go make it. Just go make that game right now. Do it. Make that game. Create it, but do it in total silence. Do not talk about it publicly until you have an extremely polished demo. Something that's really pretty, really beautiful, and then go public with it. Post it on itch.io. Post it anywhere you can think of. Put it anywhere that people will download games. And then promote it everywhere, especially where the fans might be. Then sit back and hope that it goes viral. You know, see if everyone jumps on it and like, oh my God, download this before it gets nuked. You know they're going to come after them. Now, maybe you get lucky. Maybe the IP holders look at it and they kind of go, oh, they're completely stealing our IP. But they look and they go, oh, wow, the fans are loving this. And then they reach out to you. And they kind of knock on your door or your email and kind of say, hey, let's talk about this. That's the dream scenario. Now, the reality is probably going to be you're going to get cease and desist letters for some really scary lawyers. That's probably the route that's going to come to you, right? But if that happens, I'll say if, when that happens, you now have, here's the plus side, you now have a fan base. Right? You've put a game out there and all these people are jazzed because of what you've done. You now have these people that are interested in what you're doing. You can take those fans and say that, okay, look, they shut us down. Oh, darn, this sucks. But look, we're working on this game now. And they may carry over. So you, without much investment, you now have these people on board and hopefully will support your next game. Or if you're feeling really lucky, you could double down and try and reskin this current project, change it just enough, whatever that percentage is, that magic 10, 15%, that makes it different enough that you can avoid the wrath of the lawyers. It's risky, but obviously then if the gameplay is the same, and the graphics are similar enough, then there's a decent chance that those fans that wanted that IP to begin with are willing to kind of go, yeah, this isn't exactly my IP, but it's close enough, and still follow you over, and you could have some fantastic sales. Either way, understand that that is a ton of work that brings on a lot of risk, of course. We're talking major financial investments for something that may not pay off. Okay, but let's talk about an example of someone that succeeded doing this. Forgiveness instead of permission. You guys familiar with this? Black Mesa? Yeah. Though Black Mesa started off as just a simple mod. Two different groups were modding, just creating their own content. And then they merged together and decided that they wanted to create a whole new update to the original Half-Life game, just using the latest and greatest technology. Just update the graphics, anything like that. And of course, they're stepping on IP toes. But rather than killing it, Valve embraced it. God bless Gabe Newell. Gabe's just like, yeah, I like this. And they gave them their blessing, and they were allowed to continue on. And ultimately, the game was released commercially, to great reviews, by the way. So, it is possible. It helps if you're doing something that Gabe likes, since, Gabe is such a juggernaut individual. But anyways, there is a great no-clip documentary. If you just do a YouTube search for Making of Black Mesa Game, you can find it. I highly recommend it. It gives the backstory of how they started and how they actually pulled this off. So if the risky route is your choice, that's your benchmark right there. Okay, now for the much less risky approach, and that would be public domain IPs. These are intellectual properties that are no longer owned by any person or company. That means anyone can use it. Here are the rules, at least as they pertain to the U.S. I'm an American. It's a whole bunch of technical crap, but long story short, generally the older the IP is, the more likely that it is now available in the public domain, owned by nobody. But your mileage may vary, so don't assume that just because it's old, that it's still not owned by somebody. Just as a point of fact, US and India actually reinitiated their IP agreements back in 2021. So some of the stuff may actually pertain to you guys, especially if you're targeting a US market release. So it's just something to keep in mind. Here are a couple of examples of things that are public domain, kind of US-centric, but all these guys are owned by nobody. Now, I'm sure you're aware probably that Disney's made multiple movies based on Tarzan and Alice in Wonderland. But guess what? That doesn't stop you from making your own Tarzan game or your own Alice in Wonderland game. Doesn't stop you. But having said that, you still have to be really, really careful because Disney has a lot of lawyers with nothing better to do than to destroy you. So let me explain the context here. The content is public domain, but the art is still protected. So let's do an example. Alice in Wonderland, right? There you go. Now, American McGee has created a couple of games based on Alice in Wonderland, and he did not get sued. The key reason is you're not going to look at her and think that's the same person. You see how he radically, that's the goth version of Alice, and Cheshire Cat, well, that's just creepy, You're not going to look at that and kind of go, oh, that's Disney. No, there's nothing there that says Disney at all. And as a result, they successfully made multiple Alice games with no scary lawyers from Disney knocking on their door. Now, recently, this is very recent, I think just this past year, Winnie the Pooh entered public domain. You guys familiar with this? And what's funny is these guys, opportunistic guys, this is fantastic. They created a Winnie the Pooh movie called Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. Now, watch the trailer. I really suggest you check this trailer out because the movie is really, really, really bad. I mean, I'm going to go to limb and say that maybe their entire budget was maybe $10,000, and that's probably being generous. It is terrible. The production values are terrible. The story is bad. The acting is bad. I can't even say it was shot well. It's not even like the thing was in focus. There's nothing redeeming about this. But it doesn't matter. Because of the IP tie-in, because they have Winnie the Pooh as the subject matter, it managed to get a massive amount of press. Now, and this is something they shot on video. This is just something they threw together. But it worked. It got released in theaters, and it made $5 million. And it's a terrible movie. But because of the interesting kind of, oh my God, Winnie the Pooh is a slashing, killing machine, that shows what IP can do, even if it is public domain. So, bottom line, if the IP is in the public domain, absolutely fair game for you guys, even if Disney is still using it. But you have to be really, really careful and keep your content original to keep the lawyers at bay. Just always remember that. So what are the advantages with working with public domains, public domain IPs? You have a built-in fan base right from the start. Winnie the Pooh fans, Alice fans. There it goes. No licensing fees, no royalties, nothing. There's no one to pay. All the money you make goes to you. There's no licensing fees at all. Also, I love this. No one to answer to. Total control of the content. So hypothetically speaking, if you wanted to take the lovable Winnie the Pooh and turn him into a homicidal killing machine, you could. Oh wait, that's already been done. You can do whatever you want. You have total control. You have no one to tell you no. That is absolutely fantastic freedom for something and content that people will instantly recognize. So public domain IP is a fantastic tool. All right, what are the disadvantages? So far I've been saying this is fantastic, right? First question, exactly how big is the fan base? And are they even gamers? You know, if you make something super obscure, that's great, but no one may care because they may not be fans. Or they may not be gamers, rather. No license means no exclusivity. When you license something, traditionally, it says that you get to make the game and no one else gets to make the game as long as the contract holds. This is the opposite. Anyone else can make that same game you're making with the same name. Now, I mean, if you get in the whole art ripping stuff, then you can try and shut them down. But, you know, we've seen how that works on different games in the past, right? And if you are successful, you can guarantee that you're going to have lots of competition and lots of clones. If you can do it, they can do it. So that is an absolute downside to working with public domain IP. All right, so let's talk about an example. This is my third and final IP that I'm going to discuss. So 2 of my IPs are licensed, and 1 was public domain. Back in 2012, a long time ago, early days, for mobile, I came up with a goofy idea. Sorry. I came up with a goofy idea for a game, and I challenged myself just to see if I could do it. I want to see if I can make a game in a month, just as a personal challenge. Now, ultimately, I was close. It took me about 5.5 weeks to complete it. It is called Save the Titanic. It's a very simple game. There you go. See it? You're on the bridge. There's the wheel. There's the iceberg. Turn the wheel. Go. That's the whole game. It was a joke. I did this just to crack my friends up. That was the whole purpose. Like I said, there was an experiment just to slap something together and kick it out there. You can see the kind of clay look to the art style. That was not anything I gave a lot of thought to. I did it for 2 reasons. One, I thought that aesthetic kind of lightened the subject matter. I mean, after all, it is a ship going to the bottom of the ocean with lots of people on it, right? So this kind of cartoony style sort of buffers that a little bit, but also equally important was the fact that I knew that I could make all of this art content really, really fast. And in this case, I think all of the art for the entire game, I think I banged out in 2 days flat. Done. You know, like I said, this is an experiment. I just want to see if I could do it. And this is the game.
Blasted hangover. Here, take the wheel and wake me if anything interesting happens. You know, something like...
Iceberg, dead ahead!
This is as good as it gets.
You'll excuse me, I have some deck chairs to rearrange.
That's it. You win, you lose. That's the whole game. You know, and the funny thing is the fact that, excuse me, the initial release, I made it too hard. Because I didn't test it, right? So I had all these 1-star reviews, people complaining that it's like, the game sucks. I can't even make it past the first level. That's all there is the first level. That's the whole game. That's it, you know? I didn't promote it. Like I said, I created it to amuse my friends. My whole goal was to have, I put like 20 of my friends' names in the game. So I get like 20 downloads. But it found its own audience. And when I say that it blew up big time. Not only did it briefly become the #1 game in the App Store, once again, 2012, this is before Android, right? Apple only, excuse me. It was the #1 game in the Apple App Store, but it was the #2 app of all apps. Look at this. I'm right here below the Disney Channel app. It's not Disney Plus. This is way back in 2012. That's the Disney Channel app, right? And I love this. Okay, I got to gloat. Look down here. It's Angry Birds Space HD, and that's their debut. They debuted down there, what is that, #6. And I can almost promise you that their budget was slightly larger than mine. You know, once again, 5.5 weeks, 2 days of art, okay? Ultimately, I released it on Android as well when Android came around. Excuse me, sorry. Ultimately, Save the Titanic has generated over 6 million downloads on mobile. Now, I told you about all those 1-star reviews, so I immediately made an adjustment and made it a little easier to beat the game. The good news is, excuse me, people were beating the game and they were giving it 5 stars. So if you look at the reviews, it's all 5 stars, all 1 stars, nothing in between, But the bad news is once they played it and they go, I beat it, and they give it a 5-star, and they look and they go, wait, that's all there is? And they uninstall the game. So that's why it was like this straight to the top. And then it just trailed off, right? But here, let's be honest. I would love to say that people downloaded the game because they love the gameplay. Yet, no, that's not why they download it, right? Let's be real. They download it because the name Titanic, it pulled them in. They saw that, they saw the style, and it wasn't that many years after the movie came out, so I had that connection, Everyone wants to save the Titanic, and it clicked. And before anyone asks, I'll save this so you don't have to ask this question. Yes, I did try and continue the success. Obviously all my friends are kind of going, dude, do something else, Titanic 2 or whatever. So I was like, well, where do I go? I mean, because that's the whole game. So it's like, okay, I'll come up with like an endurance mode. Kind of like at the time there was Temple Run. That was the game that I was using as my template. So I made like a quasi Temple Run endurance mode. And I spent a couple of months. That took me a couple of months to actually implement fully because there was real gameplay in that. Released it. No one played it. No one cared. All he cared about was this original, right? That was it. And what I had to accept was that I had briefly captured lightning in a bottle. It worked, and it was brief, but it passed, and unfortunately I've not been able to recreate that. But it shows that when you make something sometimes and it perfectly connects, it blows up. And by the way, you guys have all heard of Flappy Bird. Flappy Bird was super famous. This is similar. I was a year before Flappy Bird, so I like to say that I'm the original Flappy Bird. Game is way too hard, has cartoony graphics styles, simple gameplay mechanics, and millions of downloads. Yeah, that's me. The only difference is the fact that, they played it and they uninstalled it and moved on. Anyway. Okay, so in the end, it's absolutely virtually impossible to predict if a game is going to be a hit or if it's going to fail. I mean, if they knew, the studios wouldn't spend $300 million making an online multiplayer game and then can it after 2 years, You don't know what's going to hit and what's going to fail. But I believe in my heart of hearts that integrating an IP into the mix, even if it's one that's in the public domain, is definitely going to increase your chances of success. Hopefully I demonstrated that here. So, to sum up, here we go. Big finish. Yes. I think this demonstrates that small companies can, in fact, work with big intellectual properties, either licensed or not. Do your homework and do your prep to greatly increase your chances of getting them to give you the license. Be diligent, but be really careful when you're contacting the IP holders. Once again, you don't want to risk getting blacklisted. That would be the worst thing, especially if you have a great passion for the game and you know that you're never going to be able to make that game. That, to me, is a worst case nightmare scenario. And finally, even a public domain IP can help you succeed. Be it a slasher Winnie the Pooh movie made for pennies or a goofy Save the Titanic game made in just a couple of weeks. Public domain can do fantastic things for you. And there we are. That's me. Email if you just put like Dustin at in front of the Scary Robot. You can email me there, but there's my vital info. Thank you guys for hanging out, and happy to do any questions that you guys might have. Hopefully you guys, because we have way too much time, so hopefully you guys got some good questions for me. Don't everyone jump up at once. No? That's fantastic. So that means that I gave you all the information you could ever need, right? You have a question? No? Okay. That's great. That means I succeeded. I did the perfect talk. I covered everything, and you're going, no, well, let me ask him about that. No, he answered that. Well, no, he answered that too. My God, he did. He actually covered everything. In that case, thank you guys so much for hanging out with me and listening to me ramble on about IP, and I hope you guys consider this, because personally, I don't ever plan on making another game without having some IP tied into it, because I think it greatly increases your chances for success. So there you go. Thank you guys.